Hello, I'm Lucy Beadnell with the Arc of Northern Virginia, and we are so excited to have Chase Phillips here today to talk about planning for retirement for a family of three. And we know that our parents really are very concerned about how to make sure that their long-term planning and retirement savings not only meet their needs, but the needs of their adult child or sometimes multiple children with disabilities or other kinds of adult support needs. Not that retirement savings isn't stressful enough already, right? So that's why we're bringing in the experts. Chase is with us here, and his whole work focuses on developing and implementing financial strategies for families and businesses and individuals, including people with disabilities and all kinds of needs. He started with Merrill Lynch in 2008 and concentrates on clients' primary concerns: keeping their capital, minimizing taxes, and making sure we have enough lifetime cash flow. To ensure that these strategies are developed for his clients, Chase works in conjunction with estate attorneys and CPAs and multi-generational wealth strategies in tandem with philanthropic techniques, right? We've got all our bases covered here. In addition, Chase's practice has specific focus on improving the financial well-being of individuals with disabilities, regardless of how severe that disability is. And this includes customized financial strategies for things like special needs trust, pooled trusts like ours, conservatorships, guardianships, charitable trust, generational skipping trusts, which I'm excited to hear about. And from 2017 to 2023, Chase has been recognized by Forbes and Shook as one of America's next generation wealth advisors. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a BA in history. And while there in Wisconsin, Chase was a member of the men's rowing team, where he was the coxswain of the men's varsity eight. He's also selected to the 2005 and 2006 U.S. national rowing team, where he represented the U.S. at two World Rowing Championships in Japan and Belgium, bringing home a bronze medal for the USA in 2005. He serves on the board of the Spina Bifida Association and lives in Arlington with his wife, Beth, daughter, Grace, son James, and son Benjamin. Chase, we are very excited to have you here. As we heard in that introduction there, you have the knowledge, skills, and expertise that our families are looking for, right? Not only do you know the money piece, but you know the compassion piece and the long-term planning piece and the disability and the benefits and the trust and all those kinds of things that we need working and talking together. So we are very excited to hear from you today. If you have questions and you're watching live, feel free to put them in the Q&A bubble anytime. If you're watching this recorded and you have questions anytime, you can go to the arcofnova.org/answers and send us a question. And we're happy to help put you in touch with Chase or otherwise get you answers to your disability related questions. So without further ado, the man of the hour, Chase Phillips, please take it away.
Lucy, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak and to talk about these topics. I know that these items weigh very heavy on families, and Lucy, you and the Arc of Northern Virginia are really helping on the day-to-day, boots on the ground, practical solutions across the gamut, whether it be benefits, legal planning, the pooled trust, et cetera. And so today we're going to talk long-term and really think about, how families can be in the best possible position to, of course, cover themselves, their own robust retirement, but also making sure that there's resources when they're gone for the loved ones. I think that this work for me personally, and for most in our industry that have this special needs planning expertise, it's extremely personal. And just to give you a brief background about myself, I was born with a disability. I was born with spina bifida at Fairfax Hospital almost 40 years ago next year. And I saw my family give up a lot to make sure that I had everything that I need. And I saw, whether it's going to doctor's appointments or PT or the next brace appointment or trying to figure out, what the next surgery was going to help to enrich my future life. I saw my parents go through it. As the person, it's just your life. It's what you know. But the parents are the ones that really put their heart and soul into making sure that their loved ones have everything they need. So I just want to thank everyone on this call today for all you do. You don't get thanked enough. There's a ton of resources. There's a lot of times it's like drinking out of a fire hose. So my goal today is that this webinar really kind of helps you. If you haven't gotten started on the planning, it helps you get started. But you're going to take certain tidbits to maybe kind of continue your journey along. And we're here, we're not going anywhere. So to the extent that we can be a resource down the road, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. And of course, you know, Lucy, you got Lucy in the ARC on speed dial. I'm going to talk a little bit in our kind of a traditional slide format, but then I'm actually going to do a hypothetical financial plan for you guys, because I actually wanted you to see how we think about beginning this planning for 2 generations at one time. And so I've put together an actual financial plan where I've made up a lovely couple who are 49 and 50. Their names are Example Phillips and Sample Ruskowski. And I'm going to show you kind of some of the things that we think about as we're reviewing families' finances and really helping to point the ship in the right direction ongoing. And then we'll open up for questions. So the questions that's typically the best part of this. You get to really ask what's on your mind, and we can start a dialogue together, you know, kind of help you queue up your next steps for your personal situation ongoing. So if I may, let me go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll kick this thing off. So I think, you know, before cracking into these slides, you know, what are the major questions that families have? Like, what are the items that keep families up at night? And so in my experience, it follows a few avenues, and the money's connected to all of these avenues. I think the biggest one is, you know, how are we going to make sure our loved ones have all the resources that we need? Of course, while we're living as parents, but then what about after we're gone, right? You have immensely large shoes to fill. And so that question mark involves money, how much money will be needed. That question involves where will our loved ones be living, and how independent will they be, and what supports need to be around them. Those questions include, hey, I've got this special needs trust. Who's going to monitor the trust long-term? Who's going to be that successor trustee for families? Is it going to be a family member? Is it going to be a sibling? Is it going to be a corporate trustee? You know, and then what's the rest of the circle of support really going to look like? Who's going to take care of the caretaking, and who's going to advocate, and who's going to just make sure that, you know, our loved ones are living the life that they want to live, just the way that all of us want to live an empowered life to do the things that we want to do. And so all of these things, the money is like the tip of the iceberg for all of these decisions. And so really what we try to do is help give the families clarity about the direction that we're headed. And we help to give clarity about, you know, security later on with money. And ultimately, how are we going to fund the trust? How much money is going to be available? And how do we do it? And what are the best things we can do today to put our future selves and our future children in the best possible place, right? These are the things that I think really weigh heavy on families. But hey, you're dealing with the day-to-day. You're going to the next PT. You're adjusting the brace. You're getting the wheelchair fixed, right? I deal with these things personally all the time. And I do think that the longer term planning piece, it just takes a back seat. It does. You're just trying to get the next day done. Tighten the school. How can we get the schools to provide better resources? And yet at the same time, we're thinking about, oh my goodness, do we have enough money? Do we have enough resources? What's it all going to look like, right? And so we really try to bring these longer term topics to the surface for families. And it's an ongoing project, right? You need to continually check in on your planning and make sure you're on track. So having said that, you can see my slides here. And if you've seen me speak before, you know that I love to set the stage talking about these 4 pillars. Because in my view, as you're organizing your thoughts, because this work is so multidisciplinary, it's not just a financial advisor that's going to help you. It's not just an estate planning attorney or a special needs attorney. It's not just the ARC. It's not just the benefits expert. Ideally, you have a team of people that are really working in tandem to make sure these 4 areas are covered. Okay, so let me set the stage by talking about these areas. They're not all directly financially related, but finances play a part in all of them. Okay, so the 4 pillars: government benefits, legal planning, family communication, and financial planning. You got your coffees. We love coffee. Friday morning. All right, let's get pumped up. So government benefits. You know, the more resources one has, the more you have to offset costs and the more that doesn't have to be directly funded out of your pocket, right? And so when we think about these benefits, we're really thinking about them broadly first, right? Federal, into state, into local. So you can imagine that pyramid happening there, right? And so for a lot of you, this is going to be review, but I think that this is very bread and butter for your planning. So on the federal side, for most families, when your child turns 18, you enter the realm of potentially being eligible for supplemental security income, which is a monthly benefit right now. It's just a little under $1,000 a month. And that is a benefit that's paid by the federal government. But the key to that is it actually automatically qualifies you for Medicaid. And so Medicaid is a federal health insurance program, but it's administered by each of the states. So each of the states and how it's run is a little bit different. But those Medicaid programs, of course, are there to pay for medical expenses. But they also are the barrier of entry to getting into other programs, things like Medicaid waiver programs and housing programs. And so a lot of times, even to apply for some of these other supplemental benefits, you have to show Medicaid eligibility. And then beyond the Medicaid piece, we talk about Medicaid waivers. The ARC is just such an amazing resource for navigating particularly the Virginia Medicaid waivers. As we know, it can be hard. There can be long wait lists. You want to get on those lists early. Lucy and her team are just pros at this. So this is getting to that multidisciplinary piece. You want to utilize the experts that are local to you to understand the benefits that are available. And then even more specific than that, I think that families are getting more creative about, hey, how can we help families in need? And so there's plenty of grassroots items that come to fruition, whether it's independent housing or micro grants, families that are donating homes and real estate to develop independent living programs with supports for people who, want to, they want to get out of the nest, whether you have a disability or not. You want to, your kids might want to kind of live their lives, right? I get around using a wheelchair and crutches. Never once in my life did I think I was ever going to stay with mom and dad for the rest of my life. And so I just think I encourage all of our clients to just network, be aware of the different things that are happening around you and the benefits that are available. Employment training, understanding kind of what resources are available to make sure that your loved ones have all the resources they need to be the best possible version of themselves. So benefits are really key to all of this. And I'm going to go through these pillars pretty briefly because I really do want to hone in on the financial piece today. But when we talk about government benefits, guys, we understand that they're means tested, right? SSI and Medicaid are means tested benefits. And so part of the key to all of this planning is to understand that we have to protect the benefits. And so legal planning is huge in that, right? You've probably heard the word special needs trust thrown around. Perhaps you have a third-party special needs trust set up. Maybe you have a first-party trust set up that's funded, or maybe you have a pooled trust account set up. But these special needs trusts are really intended to protect benefits so that your loved one can have assets for their benefit, but the money that's held in those special needs trust accounts are not part of that $2,000 overall means test that one needs to be able to qualify for SSI and for Medicaid. And so any competent estate planning attorney that has significant special needs planning expertise will be able to help you navigate. As important as the financial aspects are, there's nothing more important than getting your legal house in order when it comes to this planning. I would say for anybody that hasn't engaged in starting their estate planning, here we are, it's October. Maybe not by the end of the year, but let's say by first quarter 2024, I would encourage you to get your legal planning in order, which is, wills, powers of attorney, medical directives, possibly a special needs trust if it's needed. I'm not an estate planning attorney. I don't draft these documents and I don't give legal advice, but I'm aware of these items. And so I encourage our clients to be very proactive because, again, there's nothing more important than having a solid legal plan in place. The family side of this is, I always say it's two-sided, right? Because a lot of times family, grandparents, aunts and uncles, cousins, they understand that if you've got a loved one that has additional challenges that might require additional resources, family often asks, hey, how can I help? How can I gift money? How can I be a part of your loved one's life? And so I think with family, you have to understand that the more you communicate with them, the more prepared they will be to help in the proper way. Okay. Because if you don't communicate, we all heard potentially those stories where Uncle Joe wants to leave money. Uncle Joe doesn't totally know how to leave money, or he hasn't been educated on how to leave money, and he passes away and leaves money directly to your loved one. And all of a sudden, we have a situation where your child receives money directly. That's jeopardizing their benefits. And now we have to scramble to fix the issue. So with all the planning that you're doing and everything that I'm going to talk about today, I know money's a very, I would say, somewhat taboo subject. It's very personal, but you want to have these conversations with the people that are in your life that you think might be impacting or might be in your child's life for later. And so one of the things that I encourage all of our clients to do is to put together a working letter of intent. Now, this sounds like a fancy document. It's not a legal document, but it really is a combination biography and instruction manual for your loved one. And it really kind of gives the instructions that successor caretakers would need, successor trustees would need. It lists your child's passions, the things that in their life that they enjoy doing, the things they don't enjoy doing. And so I encourage clients, take a legal pad of paper and just record your day as you go through it. Write the things down that you do on a day-to-day basis as a parent that somebody else wouldn't necessarily know to do. And a lot of times I think you'd be surprised about the things that become second nature to you. For me, growing up, I always had to check my skin with my bracing. Like, these braces can rub. You need to check the cushioning. Like, as a parent, that would somebody would need to know that if they needed to take over for me, is understanding like, hey, are our ducks in a row? So anything that your loved ones, again, caretakers, trustees, family members, trust protectors need to know should go into that letter of intent document. And that's not something you put it in a Word document, update it every year, and before you know it, you've got a great working document for them. Big part of this planning is making sure you've got all of your Benny designations where they need to be. You might be familiar with 401k plans, you might be familiar with IRAs, various retirement buckets of money, life insurance. All of these accounts pass outside of your normal will, and they pass via a beneficiary designation. And so a lot of times we see families that have 4, 5, 6, 7 outside old 401ks hanging out there, and each one of those carries their own beneficiary designation. So one of the things you want to do in your proactive planning is just make sure that those beneficiary designations are reflective of your current plan, right? If you're planning on leaving money to a special needs trust, you need to make sure that that trust is properly identified within that planning document, within that beneficiary designation, so that that portion of the money goes to the trust and not to your child directly. And again, you want to communicate these instructions to family. If you have grandparents that have IRA accounts with their, your child is a contingent beneficiary and not the trust, that's a potential planning pitfall. So be a sheriff with your beneficiary designations and make sure that people are aware of how to properly leave money. We talk about this over and over and over again. So there we go. We got legal planning and we got financial working together. One of the things that I'm going to send out is a workbook that just kind of helps with these 4 pillars and keeping organized, and it helps you triage what you need to do next. It also has a great budgeting worksheet on it so you can start thinking about what the outflows are for your kids. Okay. Financial planning. All right. So here we go. This is where the rubber meets the road. So, I think the dollars and cents of this is people understand, hey, I got to have enough money for our family, right? So mom and dad need to be okay. Because I always say, if mom and dad aren't okay, kids aren't okay. But I think there's a big question mark around how much you're going to need. And the earlier you are in this planning process, if your kids are young, the more ambiguous this is all going to feel, right? So if you've got a 5-year-old who has spina bifida, you may not know yet what their needs are going to be. They're only 5. I have 3 children. Like, I don't know what their needs are going to be later. So it's very difficult to predict. But the benefit that you have being early on in the process, that you can start tracking early. You can get your ducks in a row early. You can really kind of start to get everything lined up for when that transition period starts to kind of take full on effect, starting 17, 18, 19, and 22 and beyond. But you want to start tracking outside expenses, out-of-pocket expenses directly related to your kids, because you want to start building a working budget and lifestyle for them. As they get older, this is going to start to become more concrete, but the better idea you have of what their needs are, the more clarity we can provide about how much money is going to be needed to be set aside to pay for X, Y, and Z expenses later. And guys, this is an ongoing thing. The budgeting needs to continue over and over and over again. You're constantly checking in on what their needs are. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about life insurance as a gap for planning. We're going to talk a little bit about asset allocation and investment management. We're going to talk a little bit about 529 plans versus ABLE accounts and how to think about those. And like I said, I'm going to show you guys an actual example financial plan where we can get into some of the nitty-gritty here. All right, so we talked about at the beginning, what are the pressing questions? Who's going to take care of our loved ones when we're gone? Will there be adequate financial resources available? And who are going to be the major players in place to help? Financial advisor, special needs attorney, advocates, right? All of these folks should be part of your team working together as one to help you answer some of these questions. Okay, so when we talk about this multi-generational planning piece, the reason why we talk about it as 2 lifetimes at once is, again, we got to make sure mom and dad are okay, while also ensuring that there's enough money left over when you're gone. So I'd say that the major factor that separates this planning from your more typical families, we have to get a very good sense of how much is going to be left over. And so in all the planning that we do for families, we know that the potential wealth number at the end of one's life is really key. And so I'm going to talk to you in a minute about, hey, how much can you spend from a bucket of money over one's lifetime? How do we ensure that there's enough money left over? What if mom and dad spend through their own asset base because they become disabled themselves? Or what if there's a long-term care event, right? There's a lot of question marks that come into play with this planning that at least need to be thought through as potential pitfalls that could change the plan. And so 2 generations at once, and then sometimes what we end up seeing, I'm willing to bet at least a couple of families on this call can identify with planning for 3 generations at once. So if you can imagine mom and dad, and in the case that I'm going to show you, hypothetical 49 and 50-year-old mom and dad have 15 and 17-year-old kids, one of whom has a disability, and they have a aging parent who's in their 90s. And now, being that sandwich generation, you're having to make sure there's enough resources for your kids while also potentially providing support for your aging parents. We see this quite a bit. You end up wearing a lot of hats. And so we help families navigate that all the time. And so if you've got expenses for aging parents, we need to build that into the plan as well. Okay. So how do we think about how much money you're going to need? How do we, very big picture, start to back into that equation? So I'm going to show you a chart in a second that, I come back to over and over and over again. Our clients probably think we beat a dead horse on it, but I think it's so important because right now, coming out of this call, you could start doing a pretty, I'd say, big picture calculation as to maybe where you stand relative to some spending needs for yourself, but also for your kids. This probability of median income needs chart is, I think, very foundational to what we do. And it really shows you long-term, how much money can you spend from a portfolio over time? Which is going to tell you how much money you're going to need to have set aside to meet X, Y, Z spending goal, right? And this is so apropos. I mean, special needs families spend on average 30 to 50% more than your typical family. So you want to get a good grasp about what your money can do and how much money you can receive when you actually turn on that spigot and start withdrawing from your assets for yourself, but also for your kids when the money ultimately gets to the special needs trust. So this chart here shows you withdrawal rates, 4% down to 8%. And then along the horizontal axis, we have different asset allocations, which is just how much you have in bonds versus stocks, growth-focused investments versus income-focused investments. And so this withdrawal rate shows you at 4% that you basically have at best a 97% probability of success to take 4% per year from a portfolio, okay? So if we're thinking about this in terms of round numbers, If you have $1 million set aside, a 4% withdrawal rate is $40,000 a year. So if you have a child that has, $30,000 or $40,000 a year of needs, I would say bare minimum, you need to have $1 million to $1.5 million set aside for them to cover, assuming a 4% withdrawal rate, right? And you got to factor taxes into that, got to factor inflation, which we do for clients. But this is very big picture on how you start thinking about this. And so 4% a year at 97% probability of success means that you got a 97% chance of not running out of money. And then you look vertically from 97 and you see that you've got a 75% bond allocation and 25% stock. So that's going to be the allocation needed to give you the best probability of success for taking 4%. Now, 5% is also doable. You have an 80% chance, right? So you can take a little bit more. You still have a pretty high probability. But in order to do that, you got to have a little bit more in growth-focused investments like stocks. And so one of the ways, guys, that you might think about this 4, 5, 6% rate of withdrawal rule, a lot of it depends on the age, right? So if you are retiring in your 50s, I'd say you probably don't want to take more than 3 or 4% a year. If you're retiring in your 60s, you probably don't want to take more than 4 or 5% a year. If you're retiring in your 70s, 5 to 6% as you get into your late 70s is going to be doable. So the longer time horizon you're covering, the lower your withdrawal rate needs to be. And so that's something that also needs to be thought through with your kids. If your kids are going to outlive you by 30 or 40 years, and we project that they're going to be in their 50s when you pass away, we might have to be looking at a 3 to 4% withdrawal rate from their special needs trust in order to sustain their lifestyle that you've helped create for them over the course of your lifetime. So this probability median income needs chart is a great compass for you to determine, okay, how much do I have? How much am I going to need? And where does my asset allocation really need to be to get there? And by the way, the more you need, if you needed 8%, then you need to start taking more risk. And so in this case, 100% stocks gives you the best opportunity at an 8% withdrawal rate, but you're having to take more risk to get there. And at that point, you're under a 50% probability of success. So we really like to see families at 3 to 5% withdrawal rates. That's the safe zone. Okay, so you might be thinking, Chase, look, we've got money for our retirement, but we don't just have a couple $1 million sitting aside for our kids. This is like, how do we think through that? And so we really want to start, number one, take a deep breath, but take a look at your resources, right? Take an inventory of everything. So you've got potential resources, you've got 401ks, you've got investments, you've got family that might want to help, and you've got insurance, okay? And in addition to that, benefits are going to help offset some of this. So, a pro like Lucy and her team at the ARC are going to help you navigate the suite of benefits that are going to be available for you. And then, of course, we've got our federal SSI programs, and we have tax-efficient accounts like ABLE accounts that can really supplement a special needs trust. So you got to take an inventory of everything. The insurance piece of it's interesting because a lot of times if we don't think there's going to be enough money left over, we have to create a funding gap. Or we have to fill a funding gap. And so a lot of times families will utilize permanent life insurance as a way to fill that gap. Not for every family, it really depends upon your family's needs. But a permanent whole life insurance policy is potentially going to be something that could be used that creates a death benefit when you're gone. And you want a policy that you can't outlive, right? So if you live to be 100 years old, that death benefit's still going to pay out when you're gone. So we help families navigate this and really kind of understand, hey, where do we need to be in terms of our insurance needs to potentially fill any funding gaps? Term insurance comes up a lot. Term is the best possible thing to fill a particular period of time, like, hey, I'm 40 and I need to fill a funding gap until 60. But for families that are utilizing life insurance to fund a special needs trust, more than likely you're going to want to have a permanent policy that's not affected by the stock market, that you can't outlive, and that is going to have a no lapse guaranteed death benefit attached to it, with the trust listed in there as the ultimate beneficiary. So I'll give you an example of that coming up in the financial planning hypothetical. Okay, how many people feel overwhelmed, right? It's a lot. But like, guys, as parents, I know you're resourceful. You all fight, you ask the questions, you know how to tap into resources. And so this planning needs to be multidisciplinary, right? You got care managers, you have trustees, attorneys, financial advisors, insurance agent, coordinators. And so for us, we do try to help our clients play quarterback, right? We really try to bring resources to the table so that, you can triage what you need to do next. So we're often giving special needs attorney referrals to clients to say, hey, where do we start with this, Chase? What do we need to do next? So all of these folks need to be working together. I can't stress that enough. Your estate planning attorney should know your financial advisor. A lot of times we're in meetings together. Sometimes we're in that initial meeting together, right? The left hand should be communicating with the right. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to send to Lucy to give you guys is the special needs workbook. And so in here, you can start to track your child's expenses. And I would say that your budgeting needs to be two parts. And I hate to use the word budget because it feels like homework and it can be really overwhelming. But as parents, you need to understand what your budget is, of course, right? If you need to know how much you need to save, if you need to know kind of where you need to be later and how much you want to spend in your own retirement, you have to have a pretty good sense of what your budget is. But the key is to also track your budget for your kids. And while they're younger, that's going to, again, be a lot more ambiguous. As they get older, you'll see a lot more items come to fruition in terms of the clarity of that budgeting. But you need to track their expenses regularly. And then we can actually start to back into those needs based upon the financial planning, which I'm going to show you here in a second. Okay, we talked about beneficiaries. Don't assume anything with the way your family has planned. Tell them your plans. If you have a special needs trust that ultimately will receive assets, you need to let family know about that. They need to update their beneficiary designations. Okay, and getting started now is important, right? The earlier you get started, the easier this becomes, especially when you think about the time value of money. The earlier you can start putting money away, the more money is going to be available. Now, one of the things I want to talk about as I get into this hypothetical, and I'd say one of the number one questions I get in the first meeting with clients is, they say, Chase, I got the trust, or I've got the pooled trust set up. How do I start funding it? Should I fund it right now? And I'd say more often than not, the special needs trust itself, it's established. You might open an account. You might fund it with $100. But it's not going to receive a significant amount of money until there's a funding event. And a funding event typically means somebody in the family has passed away, like grandparent passed away, and now money's going to flow directly to the trust. Uncle passed away, now money's going to flow directly to the trust. Or if you have a family friend that's giving money, and if somebody's offering you a check to fund that trust, you're not going to say no to that. But as a parent, you're probably not putting your own assets into that trust, because what happens is once that trust is funded and it has earned income in it, you have to worry about the taxes, right? There are taxes to be filed. There's a 1041 that needs to be done. I'm not a tax advisor. I don't give tax advice, but you have to understand that when you fund a trust, it's going to add complexity to your life. There are rules associated with distributing the funds out of that trust. As a family member, you might be serving as trustee, or you might have the ARC serving as trustee on the pooled trust side, or you might have a corporate trustee. All of that adds complexity. So for a lot of families, these trusts are sitting there ready to be funded. They're set up, ready to go. Maybe you have $100 in there, but they're actually not getting funded for many, many years. And that is something that I think a lot of families should be aware of, because remember, once the money goes into the trust, it has to be used for the benefit of your child. If you're retaining the money in your accounts, you just keep a lot more flexibility for the plan. You can still pay your child's bills. You're going to be taking care of them, but you got to put that oxygen mask over your face first. All righty. So we talked big picture. Let's get into a hypothetical, and then we'll get into some questions. Perfect coffee break. All right. So, when a client comes to see us, one of the first things we do in the process is we take an inventory of everything. So client fills out a questionnaire, they send it back to us. They go over some basic goals with us, things they want to do with the money, retire, plan for their loved ones, maybe pay for college. Maybe there's philanthropic goals in there. Maybe it's caring for aging parents. And so we put together this initial draft of a plan. or a roadmap. And so I've put together a scenario where we've got a 49 and 50-year-old couple. They live in Fairfax, Virginia. They are both working, so they both earn $140,000 per year. And they have two kids, right? They've got a 16-year-old son who has spina bifida, might go to college, but not totally sure yet, and also not totally sure they're going to live independently. And then they have a 14-year-old child that's more typical. And so they're just trying to get heads and tails about retirement, paying for college, but also understanding that that individual with spina bifida might need additional supports for the long term. Okay, so that's kind of very big picture. And so we've got this plan, and I like to describe this as a roadmap. And it really helps us to plot out where you're going, right? Are you on track to meet XYZ goal, retirement, education, potential wealth? Are you on track? And if you're not on track, what are the things we need to do to get on track, right? And so it really helps us make changes near term to understand how those changes are going to benefit long term, right? So I have clients all the time that say, hey, Chase, we were having a glass of wine Saturday night. We were thinking about spending an additional $20,000 on speech therapy. Can we do this? Like, we know it's, we need to make sure that we're still going to be okay for long term, but our son really needs this. And so we'll actually be able to update the plan and stress test that and say, hey, yeah, here we go. Here's how it impacts the long term. You need it. Here it is in the plan. You're still okay. And I think it really helps take a lot of the pressure off families to say, hey, can we do this? Can we afford to do it? Let's talk to Chase and team to make sure that we can, right? In the same way that a CEO of a company goes to the CFO and says, hey, we want to acquire this business. Can the business do it? You can think about this as your kind of personal CFO. All right, so we've got this analysis. By the way, it assumes variability in the market. So I have to assume the stock market's going to go up and down. So when I show you guys that this family has a greater than 90% probability of success, what that means is that over 90% of the thousands of stock market simulations that we ran, the portfolio is going to be okay, right? So I'm assuming kind of worst case scenario with the market, not best case. And I'm also assuming a high degree of fluctuation with assets because I need to make sure that this family is going to be okay if we see more markets like 2022 and less markets like 2021, right? We just have to assume the market's going to be somewhat lousy and you still got to be okay. All right, so in this case, we've got some goals. Mom and dad, we talked about budgeting and they're going to need $180,000 a year. And that's a post-tax number because when you pull money out of retirement accounts, it's taxable as income. You sell brokerage assets, it's taxable as cap gains. You have dividend taxes to pay. And so I try to let all families know how much is available to spend after Uncle Sam has been paid, right? So in this case, this family is going to need $180,000 a year post-tax, starting at age 65 for them, okay? So that's in 2038. And then they have two kids, little Phillips and little Ruskowski. That's my wife's last name. So this is not my personal situation, but these hypothetical people are loosely based on our names. And so we've got average private school tuition at $53,430 for each. Inflation's baked into these numbers. College inflation is higher than normal inflation, which is, well, it's a whole nother conversation to have and how expensive college is getting. But we want to make sure that there's assets to cover college for these two kids, okay? And you might not know about how much you need. And so one of the ways that we'll opt back into this number, the desired retirement lifestyle, is actually total up the salaries, net out how much you're saving in pre-tax retirement, net out your taxes, net out how much you're saving in post-tax, and then that leaves you with a net number that you're spending. And that can be a very good way to at least start to get a sense of what you're actually spending per year so we can have a realistic view on what you're going to actually need to spend in retirement. Okay, and then sky's the limit. Okay, so one of the things that we'll end up doing is we will establish a potential wealth goal. Here's how much money you need to have when you're gone, and we'll add that in. And other goals, like I said, families list all sorts of different things they want to do with their money. But for today, we've got these three basic objectives that we're solving for. So I mentioned taking an inventory of everything. So let's talk about this couple, right? So they live in Fairfax in a $950,000 house. This family has two 401k plans. So the dad has 700, the mom has 650, so $1,350,000 in pre-tax retirement accounts. So here's the thing about retirement accounts, and I think it's very important to understand how these assets are taxed when you're gone. So in this case, this is all pre-tax traditional 401k money. Remember, when you pass away and the special needs trust inherits either all of the money or maybe a portion of the money, maybe one sibling gets half, the other sibling gets half, that money, when it goes to the trust, will need to start taking required minimum distributions. And with how the tax code is written right now, that money actually has to be distributed over a period of 10 years. And so what that trust is going to face is a pretty large tax liability over that 10-year period. Now, certain special needs trusts, if qualified, do get a lifetime stretch on there. So that is one of the benefits. But even still, even with that lifetime stretch that a special needs trust exemption gets, you still are paying ordinary income taxes. And so I think you want to keep that in the back of your mind as you are planning. And so understanding that special needs trusts have compressed tax rates, meaning they reach the highest rate faster than even your individual, leaving money from a traditional IRA, a lot of times that's the necessary way to go because that's where the bulk of your assets are. But if you have the opportunity to diversify your tax location, that can be a very important thing to do. Roth IRAs have to be distributed, but when they come out tax-free so long as you've held them in there for at least 5 years. So we do have a lot of families that think about, okay, do I want all these money going to pre-tax? Is there opportunity for a Roth 401k? Are there brokerage savings opportunities? And so we help all the time clients prioritize which buckets to fill first. And ideally, you want to have some pre-tax money, some Roth tax-free money, some after-tax brokerage money, and you might have money either in a 529 or an ABLE account as well. So in the case of this family, they got $250K in the brokerage, and then they've got two 529 accounts they've been funded, one with 100K, one with 75K. And this family, they started funding these before ABLE accounts came around. I would say that if you have a child that you're not totally sure about whether or not they're going to go to college, I think the ABLE account is an awesome tool. It tax-wise, it works the same as a 529, and that all growth comes out free of tax. But it's a lot more flexible than a 529. It can be used for college. It can be used for assistive technology. It can be used for housing. It can be used really for anything benefiting your child. And so it holds with it these tax benefits. Now there are maximums, right? You can't put more than 17K a year in. You can't have more than $100,000 in that ABLE account and still get SSI. So you got to monitor it. But for those families that aren't totally sure, the ABLE account is a great tool. And you can roll over 529 assets to an ABLE. You can do up to the contribution limit every year from 529 for ABLE. So we have many clients that are gradually moving money over to ABLE, particularly ones that think that maybe their kids will not go to college. Okay, they've got $600,000 in a mortgage, net worth just over $2 million. So this has been a couple that's saved a good amount of money. They started saving early, but I'm going to show you some what if scenarios where we can improve their situation on the savings side. So that's just a very basic net worth. All of our clients get a net worth statement. You should know what the net worth is, because that's going to very much come into play to how much you can spend later on and help track where you are. Okay, so this particular page, super busy, so I want to start in the middle. And right where it says estimated future income and savings. So as I mentioned, this family, they've got $280,000 a year of joint income, so pretty healthy income. Their son is ultimately going to get SSI, which will start when he turns 18, so $11,316. In this case, they are going to be paying rent back to the family to get the full amount. And then mom and dad are going to be eligible for Social Security, and we have that starting at age 65. Both parents were having retiring starting at 65, again, on $180K a year. And so we review with families how much you're saving, right? So this family's saving 5% of their salary to a 401k to get the full 5% match. So husband and wife are both doing that. And they are putting $4,000 per year into a 529 account. So they're kind of doing the basic savings. And this family has kind of had to pull things back a little bit because, hey, kids are expensive. We've got therapies going for the son. We've got additional outward expenses that we have to cover. And so they've had to kind of peel their 401k back to 5% and just get the 4,000 into the 529s per year to get the full state tax deduction, okay? So this is a base case. And so I can show the families that, okay, you are on track to spend 180 a year at a greater than 90% probability of success. And again, that means over the several thousand stock market simulations we ran, they've got over 90% of those thousands of simulations, that money's okay. So that means that they're going to have enough money and that the market is not good, just as well as they would have enough money if the market were good. Okay, so that's good. But the question mark here is, okay, we got it, Chase. We're on track for ourselves. And for most families, that would be fine, right? Say, look, you know, we don't need to leave a lot of money when we're gone. Our kids are going to be independent. But in certain cases, particularly for families that we service, the kids might not be fully independent and they're going to continue to need us beyond the grave. So in this case, I need to show what the maximum spending could look like based upon this current situation, and then how much money is going to be left over. So in the case for this family, 180 a year is doable, and they have a spending ceiling of 182. This would be the most money that they could spend over the course of mom and dad's lifetime, not including the rest of their child's lifetime, but for mom and dad. And I had to arbitrarily knock them off, so I have them passing at age 95. And so you can see we're pretty close to that spending ceiling. So if we're planning on spending 180 and the max that we can spend is 182, what that means is we're not leaving tons and tons of money left over for the next generation, right? So we want to pay very close attention to how much margin there is in the plan. Ideally, I would love for this client to be at achieve a lifestyle of $200,000 a year while spending 180. So they've got some wiggle room in the plan. They've got some margin. Right? And you have one-off expenses that come that might peak your expenses in a given year in retirement. So we want to have some wiggle room here. And so for this family, potential wealth, current value starts at 1.6 million. You can see how the assets grow. Assets are growing and they're retiring at 65 with somewhere in the neighborhood of $4 million. So by, you know, many stretches, a good nest egg. So if we take our 5% withdrawal rate on $4 million, that's about, you think about that in terms of income, that's about $200,000 per year pre-tax. Plus you factor Social Security into that, and you can see where this 180 starts to be doable. And so over time, the money kind of hovers around 4 million, and then inflation's kicking in, things are getting more expensive, and so they're spending their asset base down to right around $1 million. Now, this is conservative, right? Because we tend to slow our spending down when we get into our 70s and into our 80s. And then towards the end of our life, our spending might peak up again as healthcare expenses come into play, right? Long-term care insurance is potentially a conversation there to fill the gap. But if you've cared for an aging parent, you know just how expensive that can be. So, you know, while I'm assuming that the spending goes full tilt boogie in reality, you're going to potentially lower your spending here and start to increase it here. And so you can see this family's passing away with about $1 million. So if we have 2 kids and we think, okay, let's treat them equally, which by the way, we're perhaps not always able to treat our kids equally, but 50% on $1 million is 500 to one kid and maybe 500 to the special needs trust of another. So we start thinking about that 500K in terms of what they can spend. Well, take 4% on $500,000, that's $20,000 a year. Now, it depends on the situation. If you've got robust benefits, maybe you've got housing, you've got SSI working for you, you got the disabled adult child benefit that ultimately kicks in, that gives you a little bit more, you've got Medicaid, you've got some good benefits going, perhaps that $20,000 is enough. But if it's not enough, we have to alter the plan. we have to change our behavior near term that's going to set the family up to have enough money for long term. So I'm going to simulate that here. The education planning piece, a lot of times families want to know, hey, I've got these 529s. How much more do I need to put in them? This chart shows you, in this case, they've got enough in the 529 accounts to cover the first 2 years of college, but then they're going to have to come out of pocket to pay for the next 2. And so I can show families, hey, here's how much more you need to put in per year, either a lump sum amount or additional monthly amount or an annual amount. So we like to give clarity on that piece of it. So if we know that we need to leave more money, in this case, this family says, you know what, we really need to have more than $500,000 going into this trust. We need at least a couple $1,000,000 bucks. How do we get there, Chase? So what we'll do is we'll change the scenario. And so we've got this base case here on the left, sample financial plan. That's what we just went over. And what I did was I changed a variable. And I said, okay, you're getting your matches in your 401k. You're getting the tax benefits of contributing to the 529. What else do we need to do? And so for this family, because the retirement assets are significantly outweighing their brokerage, I actually want to see that brokerage bucket start to catch up a little bit, right? Because when you pass away with traditional brokerage assets, you have the benefit of stepping up the cost basis or what you paid for those investments to the fair market value on the date of your death. And so what that does, it actually can eliminate the unrealized or gain or taxable event that would occur from selling said investment. And so, like I said, leaving traditional 401k assets, again, a lot of times that's the main tool we're working with, but it's not always the most tax efficient endeavor. So for this family, I want to see them put more money in the brokerage. So what I said to them, I said, okay, keep doing your 529, keep doing your 401k, but if you've got additional resources left over, let's start to pump up that brokerage account. So I've got them saving an additional $20,000 per year. Now, when you factor the 401k and you factor the 529, where I want to see most families is saving 25% of gross income. Okay, so this family is getting them closer to that goal. They're saving $20K a year now to brokerage in addition to the 401ks and the 529s. And you can see the difference that this has. Now, their spending ceiling has gone from 182 to knocking on the door of 200. But the compounding effect of this activity for close to 20 years has a massive potential wealth difference, right? Because all of these decisions build on themselves. And the younger you are making these changes, the bigger the impact is. And so this family goes from leaving $1 million at the end of their life to $5 million. So what's $5 million mean for this family? Well, so let's just say that, okay, now we got $5 million to work with. Let's put $3 million into the special needs trust. They're going to need a little bit more. $2 million goes to the other sibling. So now what's that $3 million mean for the trust? Okay, $3 million at a 5% withdrawal rate is $150,000 per year, right? At a 4% withdrawal rate, we're at $120,000 per year. And so now you can start to see the light at the end of the tunnel and say, okay, yeah, we probably, when we adjust for inflation, our child might need somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 a year. And that $3 million starts to give them a fighting chance to get there to supplement their SSI benefits, Medicaid benefits, and enable account as well that's also serving to kind of be complementary of a trust. Able accounts were never intended to replace trusts, just as an FYI point. And now their achievable lifestyle is 195, and so voila, here we go. That one change of saving an additional $20,000 a year gives the family a very tangible target. And then I said, you know what? The other thing we can do is delaying retirement is so impactful because it's 2 more years that you're saving money and 2 less years you're having to take it out of your coffers. So delaying retirement, I had retirement go from 65 to 67, and you can see that further makes the situation even better. So for any family, we have to have these conversations about what you're willing to do. Some families might say, Chase, we can't save the additional money. We got to get there another way. So it might mean changing the investments. It might mean working a little bit longer. It might mean that mom and dad need to live on less. We cannot defactor inheritance money until we know for a fact it's either in the trust already or you've got an irrevocable trust where you're named as the Benny and it can't be changed. So I don't love to rely on outside family because that's not within the realm of our control. But every family situation is different, guys. And so you really have to look at all of the variables. And our job is to show families their options. And we work backwards. And so this is an ongoing, fluid, updating process where we're constantly checking in on the plan. Are we still on track? Are we hitting our targets? And what needs to be changed over time to get there? Okay. The final thing I'll mention before we get into the questions, and certainly I do want to talk about ABLE a little bit, but the insurance side of things, I'm familiar with insurance. I'm an insurance broker. I actually don't do a lot of it at this point because I think that there's, it's not necessarily for every single family. So you really want to, I don't think insurance is a one size fits all necessarily. But for a lot of families, it really can be a good solution. So if you said, in this first scenario, a family just said to me, Chase, we can't save an additional $20,000 a year. I'm sorry, there's just not the cash flow to do it. What that family might end up doing is buying an insurance policy to fill the gap. So they know they're going to pass away with roughly $1 million. They say, look, we need at least another $2 million in this scenario. So that family might buy a permanent life insurance policy of $2 million. And a lot of times it's a second to die policy where it pays out when the second spouse passes. The benefit to that is it's less expensive than if both spouses were insured permanently. And so that might be an adequate funding resource. So we're knowledgeable on the insurance side and we talk to a lot of our clients about it and we help them decide, is it worth it? Do you need it? And can you afford the premium? We'll actually back the premium into this plan to make sure you're still okay for your retirement, even with the premiums coming out. So we're at almost 11 o'clock here. I think we're going to 11:30 and I want to leave tons of time for questions. It's funny when we do these, I feel like I'm talking into the void a little bit. I don't get to see the interaction there and read the room. So if I may, let's go ahead and create a dialogue here and we can dive into any questions that you might have. Thank you for listening to me talk about this. I could go on all day with these topics, but let's open it up for questions.
Yeah, we've got some good ones. A great logistical one to start off with, asking Chase if you and your group work with families in any state, or do you have to find someone who works outside of Virginia? Or would they have to find someone? Yeah.
We do work with clients in every state. Part of the key with that is understanding the resources that you need locally. So we can work with clients in Washington or New Mexico or California. But the key is also having a special needs attorney on board that's local to that jurisdiction and understands the state benefits that are available. And oftentimes we'll help you find them. Special Needs Alliance is a great resource for that. A lot of your local special needs attorneys, the pros that are here in the Northern Virginia area, have friends across the country too. So yes, the short answer is yes, we can work with clients in different states beyond Maryland, DC, Virginia.
All right. The next question was, how do families help get an idea of the cost of working with a financial advisor to create a plan like this? It seems like that would go in the budget too.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the advisor. We ultimately are compensated to manage money. And so we kind of start the process with this, but we're not directly paid for that upfront planning session. Clients hire us when they end up consolidating assets at Merril. Excuse me. And so, for clients that want to get the full benefit of the ongoing planning, monitoring, guidance, to ultimately hire us, they are consolidating either all or a portion of their assets for us to help manage ongoing. And that's usually a percentage. For us, it's a percentage of assets under management. We don't get paid hourly. We manage money under the fiduciary standard, and we don't like setting up commission arrangements where we're paid a commission to buy and sell, and you pay a commission for every buy and sell. No, we get paid based upon the assets under management, and it's a percentage of what we are managing.
The next question, it's a great reminder. So many families don't have anywhere near $1 million at retirement, which is true. So this family says they're looking at retirement with 1.7 total, and they have got 2 special needs trusts with $50,000 each in them. They're looking for ideas.
That's going to be specific. I think you need to make sure, are your kids, I mean, a lot of times our kids aren't equal. So you need to understand what each individual's beneficiary needs are. And so you need to really think about what percentage of your assets are you leaving to each trust. As far as, I can't give investment recommendations on this call, but we do review investments for potential clients, right? We can say, hey, here's what you got, here's how it's done. Is it the right strategy? Maybe. If it's not the right strategy, here's how you might think about changing it. Diversification is so important here, right? Cost is important. You know, we predominantly use index funds and ETFs for clients. You want to understand what your asset allocation needs to be. If you have all of the money in bonds and you have a long time horizon, that might not be enough growth in there to get you where you're going. In contrast, if you have all the money in stocks, that might be too aggressive and you may not need to be taking that much risk. If you have annuities wrapped up in there, maybe those are the right solutions, maybe not. Depends upon when you need the money, depends on the cost of the annuity. There's a lot, it's a very big question, but that's one that we help answer for clients a lot about the investment strategy. Is it the right strategy and what changes might we propose making?
This is something that you'd alluded to, which is a great thing for parents to understand, is that you can't be drawing from a special needs trust to pay for housing if the person is an SSI recipient. SSI is supplemental security income, that base level social security program that a lot of people with disabilities start out on. So then how do we think about funding real estate for this person with a disability?
You mean how the, what specific real estate? Are we talking about investment real estate? Are we talking about a place for them to live?
Because they're asking about not being able to pay for rental housing costs with the trust, I think that a place for the person to live is a safe assumption here.
In-kind support and maintenance is a huge challenge that we have to get around. And so, you know, a lot of times folks are willing to receive a little, and I'm not an estate attorney, okay, so caveat. A lot of times folks are willing to pay for housing out of the special needs trust, understanding it's going to potentially impact some of their SSI. Some families will actually transfer money from special needs trust over to ABLE accounts, and they'll use the ABLE account to help pay. That's sort of a limited approach because the ABLE account can only receive so much per year, but that's one way around it. But I would encourage you to talk to your special needs attorney, and this would be something where I would actually do a conference call with the attorney and myself, where we could talk through and strategize some of the real estate options for protecting benefits and paying for housing out of that trust. But for the same reason that a lot of families are happy to take a reduction in SSI to have their kids live with them so they're not paying them rent back, the same thing is a lot of times the case. You've got to have the assets and you got to use the trust sometimes to pay for real estate. You can't get around it. And so you're giving up some benefits on the other side to do it. And then, you know, a lot of times you got to make a decision about the house. Like, my thoughts, is your kid going to continue to live in the house? Is that going to be an asset for the trust? You have to think through now, okay, are there going to be any other people living in that house? That impacts the trust as well. That trust has to benefit the beneficiary of the trust. So that adds complexity in the planning too. Or are you going to liquidate the house? These numbers I just showed you guys, that doesn't include the value of the home. So in this case, the family's actually leaving about $2 million, the $1 million house plus the $1 million in assets. So a lot of times families set up so that the house is liquidated and then the proceeds are funding in the trust upon mom and dad's death. So not a one size fits all approach, but those are some of the items you want to be thinking about.
Yeah, lots of things to think about. And I'll just give a reminder to folks that the Arc of Northern Virginia Special Needs Trust is one that can hold property. So sometimes families deed the family home or use funding to purchase a home that the trust then owns on behalf of the person with a disability, which makes it much easier to control rent, to state the obvious, and make sure rent's affordable. So there are,
Yeah,
as Chase said, I mean, lots and lots of ways to come at this, which is so valuable to sit down with someone and just get a sense of what kind of needs do you think you have and what would you be comfortable with? Because for some families, even if the option to purchase or own a house in a trust is there, the idea of dealing with property management isn't appealing, right? Or for some families, that's less daunting than dealing with rent. There's no one size fits all.
I was on a call just the other day with a corporate trustee who's managing a special needs trust, and they were helping the family with universal design experts, and we were budgeting in making doorways wider, 0-step entry, elevator, and they were helping to bring, and the trust was going to cover all of these items. So, the great trustees like the ARC and other corporate trustees can help you navigate a lot of these. Again, another example how this is so multidisciplinary.
We had a sort of related question, and there may not be a whole lot to add, but I don't want to skip it. That there's a family who have two adult autistic sons, um, and they live in a house that's paid for. Does it ever make sense to have that house owned by a special needs trust?
This gets into the legal territory, but sometimes, but you have to understand the rules associated with said trust. So if you're the trustee or someone else being a trustee, there are rules about who can benefit from that trust. So a lot of times if there's other people benefiting, they have to pay that trust back, rent. So there are considerations. Sometimes it adds complexity that works out, and other times it doesn't. It just depends on the situation. So you have to understand who's benefiting from that house, which is going to impact who can live there.
Makes good sense. And for folks who don't know, if you have either Medicaid or Social Security benefits or both, they generally allow you to own a house in which you live. So it's not necessary always to have it owned by someone else. But one of the advantages of that is, for example, our trust does property management. So then we'll take care of all the things that go with managing. This is broken, that needs to be fixed, the doorway needs to be widened, all those other kinds of things that sometimes are a tremendous advantage. But again, very individual, lots to think about. Okay, for long-term care planning, what's a reasonable rate of inflation for long-term care facilities if we're thinking about budgeting for a physical caregiving location?
Healthcare inflation's at about 4%. And so when we talk about how much long-term care insurance to buy, we have to first look at the plan and we determine, okay, how much money you projected to have in your 80s. And then we back into, okay, how much do we need to hedge? How much of that expense do we need to hedge? I'd say on average, the long-term care policy is hedging somewhere between 50 to 75% of the cost, depending upon the family. I also think that there's asset levels where it makes sense to have long-term care insurance and where it maybe doesn't. So I'd say if you've got around $2 million or less, and this is not one size fits all, but it just is a guidance. If you have $2 million or less, the insurance premiums and what you have to pay for a long-term care policy, you have to really evaluate, can you afford it? If you can afford it, great. If you can't, you can't put so much money into insuring a need at the expense of your own retirement. The sweet spot gets in there at 2 to like 9 million. And, those families typically you can take and carve out, a couple $100,000 to put into a permanent long-term care insurance policy that serves as an asset that has a death benefit attached if you never use it. And then you get into the, $8, $9, $10 million plus families where more than likely they might be able to self-fund. And so they would rather just keep their assets growing. So again, these aren't one size fits all recommendations, but it helps to start give you some food for thought about where you might be. But for our clients, again, we stress test the premiums and say, hey, can you actually afford to hedge 60 or 70% of the cost of the potential healthcare need ongoing?
That's a big one. Here's a great one for Chase. Is there homework you recommend we start doing independently before sitting down to work with an advisor?
Okay, sure. I love it when clients come prepared. Know where your assets are. Know the balance. Like, be able to kind of talk about your balance sheet. I'm nerdy about it. I update mine. My wife and I go over ours January 1st every year, and we can kind of compare progress and see. So if you gotta have a sense of where your assets are, how much you have, get a sense of how much you're saving, get a sense of what percentage of your gross income you are saving. That's the first piece. Understand what you spend. At least we don't require anyone to necessarily have all this nailed down, but ideally, what other homework? You got to know what questions to ask the advisors. How do you get paid? Are you a fiduciary? Are you planning based? What's your investment philosophy? What's the service model look like? How do you work with outside professionals? Do you work with outside professionals? To what extent is the tax advice that you give, and how do you pair up with a CPA? I would say have a sense of where, what are some overarching goals that you have. The more your advisor knows about what you want to do, the better we can service clients. And so sometimes I ask the tough questions that get families talking. I can't tell you how many times a couple looks at each other after I've asked them a sort of a soul searching question and go, well, honey, I've never actually said this to you before, but my thoughts are this. That's part of my job. Like, I want to get underneath the surface to, hey, what are you really motivated by? What do you really want to do with the money? Sometimes those questions are hard. Sometimes the answers are hard. So the more communicative you can be about your goals with one another, the better your communication can be to your advisor, and thus the better your advisor can help you.
Excellent. Next, a simple one. How do we take into account pension allocations? Where do those factor in with all this?
Absolutely. So let's say you've got, you work for the government and you've got a FERS program. So in that case, you're going to have a basic benefit pension, which I would include into this section here. So maybe that's $40,000 a year. So if you've got the FERS program, you've got your TSP, which is like a 401k. You've got your FERS basic benefit, which is a pension, and you've got Social Security. And so that would be factored in. County pensions, we factor in quite a bit, corporate pensions. So no doubt, that's a fixed income stream that needs to be calculated in here with your planning. And so we have questions from clients all the time about, hey, when do we take the pension? Oh, Chase, we've got a lump sum option to take it all out of the pension. Should we do that? What does that look like? We calculate that all the time for families. So yeah, pensions, oil and gas rights, rental income. I don't know, you might have a Picasso you're looking to unload. We factor all of those items into the planning. Every family's different, and that's part of what makes this planning fun.
Yeah, definitely tell your financial advisor about all your spare Picassos, right? We
Exactly.
got a question here about, can we briefly explain the pooled trust? Chase, do you want to do this or do you want me to do this?
But you're the pro, but I'll just say full trust, nonprofit organization that manages a trust, and the trust has sub accounts. And so it's a way to get into a special needs trust that's kind of already set up for you. And you got the infrastructure already in place, and it's attached to a great organization like the ARC. Now, is it the right solution for family? It kind of depends on how customized you need the trust to be. So sometimes an individual trust makes sense. Sometimes a pooled special needs trust account makes sense. It kind of depends on your family situation and ultimately kind of how much control you want to have over the assets when the beneficiary is gone. So we love pooled special needs trusts. We recommend them to clients often. Again, like with all this planning, it's somewhat case by case. Lucy, this is your world. I'll let you take it from here as far as the remainder.
Yeah, Chase gave us a great overview. So when I'm talking to families about trust options, I generally say some of the advantages of a pooled special needs trust, like with a nonprofit like ours, are that fees to set it up and to maintain it tend to be much cheaper than if you went to a bank to set up a trust or an attorney to do it. Um, Both the opening fees and the ongoing fees. We often hear that banks and attorneys have pretty high minimums to set up a trust, like $1 million or more, sometimes depending upon the situation. You can set up a trust with us with $0 in it. I would certainly say it's a great idea to put something in it just to practice the process of dispersing, but you don't have to. You could just leave it there sort of as a shell to catch an inheritance or a life insurance policy or whatever there is going to be later. I would say, generally speaking, our staff, because we're the ARC, tends to be more on the social worky side as compared to having a bank or an attorney manage your money, who are not always people who have a background in maybe handling the unusual requests or language that someone with a disability may use in asking for something, and what it takes to respond to those requests in a thoughtful way that protect benefits, but also really acknowledge that the person is doing the best they can. But as Chase said, for example, like with us, you have a number of investment portfolios you can choose from. Whereas if you had a lot of money and you wanted to go to an attorney or a bank, they could customize things for you to a greater degree. right? So if that's something that you really wanted or needed, that could be really important, especially if you could meet their funding minimums. So I would say depends upon the person, like everything we've talked about here today. But the advantage of a pooled trust is, like Jay said, you don't have to hire an attorney. It's cheaper. You can go ahead and roll right with it. Tends to be pretty flexible, supportive. It depends on what you're going to need. Um, how do we find a good special needs trust organization in Maryland? We work in Maryland. The Arc of Northern Virginia's Special Needs Trust covers DC, Maryland, and Virginia, and meaning all of Maryland and all of Virginia. We have trust with people all over those kinds of areas, and we're happy to work with anybody. Oh, here's a great one. We're dealing with a child with a rare disease. So we have very little visibility into the future in terms of life expectancy or independence, right? How do we start kind of preparing that for that with everything from, like housing and cost of living to all the other kinds of things? Great question.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so we get this question a lot, particularly for families that have younger kids. And I think, first off, as parents, you are working your tail off to give them everything, every tool so that they live the most empowered life possible. And fortunately, they're born in a world with that understands that people with disabilities can go and do amazing things, and it's a much more accessible world than it was. I have a disability, and I feel so fortunate that I've grown up over the last 40 years and not the previous 40. Okay, so, but as you're going through and you're making sure you're prepping for the best possible life, I think you also have to understand the levers that you might need to pull down the road. So if your child's not going to have independence, you may not know the answer to that. Yeah, it's probably good to do some proactive planning, probably good to have a special needs trust to where you could pull that funding piece if you need it. You might never need it, but it might be worth spending a little extra dollars to get that trust established and ready to go, or to have a pooled trust, special needs trust account set up so that if it's needed, if you need to apply for benefits, and thus if you need to protect benefits, you're doing it. So that's that piece of it there. On the college funding side, hey, I mean, you may not be sure about college. The nice thing about traditional 529 accounts is that if you're a parent and you set it up, it's actually not a means tested resource. So you can have money in a 529 and not jeopardize benefits. But you might consider funding an ABLE account, right? An ABLE account can do everything that a 529 can do, but a lot more because how you spend the money is a lot more flexible. So I would encourage one to think about maybe setting up an ABLE account. It's not expensive to do. Go online and do it. It's not expensive to maintain it. The investment choices are pretty straightforward and simple. Beyond that, I think you just want to keep outside family abreast of how your kids are doing and what their needs are over time. Look, this is never a one and done process, guys. It has to be revisited. And so we've seen scenarios where families have done all of this planning, expecting to need to pull all of these levers, and their kids end up doing great and they end up not needing it. So it really depends. But it's not that it's so expensive to be proactive. It costs a little bit more, but I think it's worth being proactive. But I also think it means that you don't want to be overly aggressive, throwing tons of money into a special needs trust when you're not necessarily sure what the future holds. And again, like I said earlier, by doing that, you're creating unnecessary complexity.
In terms of other questions about specific, how much does a caregiver cost? Those kinds of things. Chase alluded to this a few times during his presentation, but generally speaking, those costs are so exorbitant, even for wealthy families, that they're paid for by a program called the Medicaid waiver. And that's the same across the country. States may call it different things. In Virginia, we just call it the Medicaid waiver. And I'm happy to give information about that if folks want to reach out, or at the arcofnova.org. Across the top of the screen, the second option over says resource library that brings up an alphabetical menu. And if you select waivers, there's just a frequently asked questions waiver sheet. It's like, what is this? It'll pay for a caregiver in your home, in your child's home. It'll pay for a residential setting for them, those kinds of things. And that's generally how people do it, but they can have long waiting lists. In Virginia, it does. And the waiting list is based on urgency of need, which is great on one hand, but really makes it impossible to predict how long you'll be waiting if you just ask a question about it. So I would say certainly worth starting to look at those options, making sure you're on relevant waiting lists and those kinds of things. But generally speaking, we don't see families covering those costs out of pocket, like I said, because there's a public program to do it and the costs are extraordinary. without it. Oh, here's another great question about trusts. How does money in a special needs trust get handled after the beneficiary dies? Chase, do you want to do this first?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So again, not a estate planning attorney, but I think you need to be aware of the two major types of trusts. There's third-party special needs trusts and there's first-party special needs trusts. Third-party special needs trusts are the type that you would set up for money that you plan to leave to your child that's yours. So like 401k, brokerage, proceeds from the house, grandparents' money, aunt and uncle. So anything that's going to be funded from an outside source that was not directly earned by your child, that's going to go to a third-party special needs trust. You can create those trusts that when the beneficiary passes, there's successor beneficiaries. So you can control how that money then continues to flow, whether it's through the bloodline or through charity or a combination or a family friend. You can customize that with your estate plan attorney. So that's a third-party special needs trust. A first-party special needs trust, the major difference is that it's typically funded from assets that actually belong to the disabled individual. And so, for example, let's just say something happened to me and I was no longer able to work, and I've saved money in a 401k and in a brokerage account, but now I'm not able to work and I need SSI and Medicaid for myself. So now I have to get benefits. I need them to be means tested. I need Medicaid. I might also qualify for SSDI because I've got enough credits, but let's not overcomplicate. I need means tested benefits. Now I have to take my money, because I can't have over $2,000 to receive said benefits, and I have to put it into a first-party special needs trust. The first-party special needs trust, when the beneficiary passes, has something that's called a Medicaid payback provision. Medicaid will reimburse itself dollar for dollar for the funds that they paid from whatever's left over in the trust. So if Medicaid paid $100,000 out over your lifetime, and there's $100,000 left in the first party trust, they're pulling the $100,000 back. If there's $200,000 left in the trust and Medicaid's pulling $100,000 back, then the $100,000 can go on to whomever is the successor Benny. So very important when you're setting up special needs trusts that you understand where the money's coming from. In most cases, if you're talking about funding it from your dollars, you're talking about a third party trust, first parties from your child's assets, or from like a lot of times med malpractice settlements go into a first party trust. Military pension benefits, survivor benefits have to go into a first party trust. So there's a few little caveats there, but third party is more efficient for sure, but in some cases you have to use a first party because the law says you do.
Yep. So as Chase just described, you're kind of touching on the reasons for some families it makes sense to have both a first party special needs trust, knowing that with those trusts, once the beneficiary passes away, the money either has to be paid back to Medicaid or you can leave it to the Arc of Northern Virginia because we're a pooled trust, or if you're with a different pooled trust, that's the other option. Or with a family funded trust, you have a lot more flexibility, but for some people, as you can imagine, it makes sense to have both. And when you're working with someone who's on your special needs trust team, they should be generally advising you to spend down that first party special needs trust before you spend money in the third party trust, right? It's all money and it all spends the same. But this money, if it's not all spent by the time the beneficiary dies, could be used to pay back or have to go elsewhere. So that's the asset that we generally advise families to use first. I don't see any other questions in the chat. So Chase, did you have any kind of final closing thoughts for us today or resources to direct us to?
Well, I'm going to send some resources to you, Lucy, and you'll send that info out. You'll also send out my contact information. So look, we're in the community. I live in Arlington, so I'm here and I'm happy to field any questions anyone ever has. I'm not going anywhere for a while. I think I mentioned I turned 40 next year, so I'm going to be doing this for at least the next 20, 25 years. So I'm in it for the long haul. We love helping families. We love being a resource in the community. So please don't be shy. And I would say the earlier you get started, the better. And if you feel like you're too late, it's never too late. I think the hardest part is just getting going. Lean on professionals like Lucy, like myself, who can help kind of steer you in the right direction. There's a lot of people that want to help you. And thank you so much for all you do on a day to day basis. It's not always easy. Please be easy on yourselves.
Thank you so much. Huge virtual round of applause for Chase. We're so glad he was able to join us today. Takes a lot of work and time to put these presentations out there, which he generously did at no cost to you all or the Arc of Northern Virginia. We're so grateful for our community partners. Thank you all so much for being with us today. If you're watching this live, know that we'll get the recording and follow-up material sent out probably early next week is when I would expect to see them, but you can reach out to us anytime with any questions that you have, and we're so happy to help. Thanks so much for being with us.